Chair, it's my absolute pleasure to set the record straight, because very unfortunately we've had several members of the government try to mislead those who might be watching this debate, and I'm happy to restate again that the elements of Part 2, particularly the establishment of the authority, we absolutely support. It's a robust process that's been set out here. But what I must restate for the benefit of those who may be watching is that we do oppose the notion that there should be carte blanche powers given to a minister which are unnecessary, and to somehow translate that objection to Labor being against rugby. And in fact, I actually heard the statement, Labor's against New Zealand, which I find a stretch. We are trying to make good law. That is our obligation in this House. It is our job to make sure that we do this well. We absolutely support the Rugby World Cup, which is why we want to make sure that there are robust procedures in place to make sure that happens. And in my mind, I'm much more comfortable with the way that the authority has been established, the membership of the authority, the procedure of the authority, and the decision-making role that they will play, than I am with decisions being deferred or taken out of that authority's hands at the whim of the minister, and that is essentially what this bill allows. I am against that. But I do want to go over, and Labor is against that, but I do want to go over some questions that I have for the Minister and the Chair, who is obviously acting on behalf of the Minister who has responsibility for this bill. And my first question goes to the question of liability, because we are dealing with a circumventing of process and procedure that the authority has been given the powers to do, as set out in this legislation. But if, for instance, a minister takes the ability to make a decision outside the hands of the authority, where does the liability for that decision lie? Does it then lie directly with the Crown, or does it then fall to the authority who may have made a counter decision to that of the minister? So that's one of my questions around the issue of liability, because we are dealing with quite contentious issues. It is an event which has the potential to have significant health and safety issues attached to it, and could potentially become litigious. Although I do note that in Part 2, and around, I think it is specifically Section 12 of Part 2, the chairperson's, the ability to question the chairperson's exercise of their discretion before the court is removed. I imagine that holds for all of the authority's decisions. So in terms of litigation there, that power to pursue that via the court is removed. Does that then exist if a decision is made by the minister? And that's a question I put to the minister themselves around this issue of liability. It would be useful to have that clarified. But otherwise, I think this bill sets out quite clearly the criteria by which the authority must consider various decisions that are within its ambit. And I think those criteria are very, very robust. I see the committee made one change in particular, highlighting the importance of ensuring public health and safety are protected as far as reasonably practical during the period of the Rugby World Cup, and then also sets out a range of other criteria. I wondered whether or not the Minister could point out whether or not it's intended that the Minister would use the same criteria given to the authority if they exercise the power given to them in Part 4, whether or not any of those requirements that we are asking the authority to take into account, which the Select Committee has given a lot of consideration to, whether or not the Minister as well must fulfil that set of obligations, or whether it's a different criteria altogether. And I also thought that it was useful that in E of that section that we pointed out that one of the criteria is the desirability of maximising the benefit to be derived during or after the tournament from things done in preparation for and support of the tournament. Another question I have there for the Minister, because the Select Committee has split out, instead of referring to Rugby World Cup as a whole and just referring to the tournament, that then criteria does not apply for the ancillary events, which I notice the Select Committee has split out. So does that mean that the authority does not need to take into account the desirability of maximising the benefit derived when we're talking about ancillary events? Is there a separate set of criteria for those? Mr. Chair,
I call Chris Hipkins.